14 minutes out from 7 o'clock. It's great to have your company this Wednesday. I'm William Terite. Now, we are just days out from the United States deciding its next president. Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump are making their final pitches to voters on the campaign trail. Now, both have been visiting battleground states where voters could have a deciding voice. Joining me for more on this is international relations expert Jeffrey Miller. Very good morning to you.
Good morning, William.
Hey, look, it's exciting times indeed. We're so close to the US election. I often compare it to Christmas Day for myself and almost like OCR Day. But I just want to bring you into it. I'm going to ask straight off the bat, who do you think at this time has the edge to become the next president of the United States?
Well, as things stand, 1 week out from Election Day, remember it's on Tuesday in the United States, but that means Wednesday afternoon here in New Zealand. As things stand a week out, Donald Trump actually seems to have the edge. When you look at all the polling averages, when you look at the betting markets, when you look at all the data, you do see a sea of red, but it's by very small margins. And so that's the big caveat, really, when it comes to the states that really matter. And remember, the US system it's an electoral college. So not all states are equal. It's not a simple popular vote, Donald Trump versus Kamala Harris. It really comes down to what happens in Nevada, what happens in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, around 6 or 7 swing states. And those states will be where the election is ultimately decided. So Donald Trump is doing better than he has in the past. Even in the popular vote, he now has a slight edge. According to Real Clear Politics, which collates averages of all the polls. He's up by 0.4 of a percentage point over Kamala Harris. Now, just to put that in context, if you go back 4 years ago, Joe Biden had around a 7-point lead in the popular vote. And even in 2016, Hillary Clinton had around a 4.5-point lead at this stage. And of course, Hillary Clinton went on to lose the election to Donald Trump. So just to put that in context here. And when you look at the swing states, Donald Trump has a reasonable lead. When I say reasonable, we're talking 1.5 to 2 percentage points in at least 2 of them, Arizona and Georgia. Those are states that he lost last time to Joe Biden. But then it gets down to some very fine margins when you're looking at the likes of Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan. You're looking at half a percentage point of that sometimes when it comes to the lead for Donald Trump. So the simple fact of the matter, I think at this stage, 1 week out, Donald Trump has the edge. He's been building his campaign over the last couple of months since Kamala Harris took over. When she did, there was a big surge in support for Kamala Harris, of course, compared with Joe Biden. But since then, and particularly in the last 6 weeks or so, since that TV debate on the 11th of September, Donald Trump has rebuilt his campaign to some degree and has, I think, now got the edge.
This will be one of the greatest political comebacks of all time. If Donald Trump can pull this off and come back, jeepers, after a horrific result in 2020. In terms of why do you think the US public or the voters seem to just resonate with the Donald?
Yeah, Donald Trump defies expectations. The fact he's doing this well at this stage is quite incredible when you look at some of the background indicators. Now, if you listen to Donald Trump, the US economy is going to hell in a handcuff, but that's not actually the case. If you look at the headline figures, you look at unemployment, it's down to 4.1%, inflation's down to 2.4%, the stock market's at record highs, the Federal Reserve has cut interest rates, jobs are up. So things are going gangbusters really in the US economy, but that's not what's resonating with voters. I think Donald Trump has tapped into a sentiment, particularly after COVID, where a lot of people have not felt that they've got ahead, and they actually haven't got ahead, is the truth, because while the economy is doing well overall in aggregate, the gains are not evenly distributed. And there's a growing inequality that has grown since COVID began. And Donald Trump pinpoints inflation behind this. If you look at US prices, they've gone up 21% since the pandemic began, since early 2020, cumulatively. So everything now at the shops is costing 20% more than it did 4 years ago. I think we've had a similar experience in New Zealand. Just looking at what I buy in the supermarket, you would say roughly everything's about 20% more than it used to be. But that really resonates clearly with a lot of the voters that Donald Trump is pitching his campaign to. On top of that, Donald Trump is really focusing on immigration, and he's focusing on immigration even more than the economy. And very much it's all about the border and illegal immigration. He's promising mass deportations of up to 11 million illegal immigrants. So he's painting a very dark picture. We're familiar with that from Donald Trump. But it seems to be working with the voters he's speaking to. He's doing very well, particularly with young male voters who I think feel that they've been left behind. They're struggling. They can't buy a home. They can't find work quite often, or well-paid work is what we would say. There are jobs, but not necessarily high-paying jobs. So Donald Trump, in a way, he sticks it to all the people who these groups think are against them. So whether it's immigrants, whether it's China, whatever it is, the Democratic establishment, Donald Trump, he claims that he speaks up for the little guy here, and that's very much in the end his campaign message. In the end, that has been very much the same since 2016, the Make America Great Again tagline.
Sure. And look, let's switch tack now and talk about the Kamala camp. I mean, is it safe to assume, or perhaps we shouldn't assume, that she has the younger voters? I mean, look, if you take a look at, TikTok, for example, it seems as though younger voters are on the Kamala Harris train. Although, what's your assessment?
Younger female voters in particular, I think Harris has done well with. And again, that's also because of the issues that she's focused on. Despite all the economic strengths right now, Harris is not talking too much about the economy. I mean, she is, but she's focused more on what they call reproductive rights in the United States, really abortion rights, because that's been a big issue since the Supreme Court decision last year struck down the Roe versus Wade decision on the right to abortion. And some states have then banned abortion, the likes of Texas, for example. So Kamala Harris held a big rally in Texas with Beyonce on Friday night, pitching very much this message about the need to protect the right to reproductive rights. And so she's been focusing on that as her kind of culture issue, if you like. I hate the term culture war, sometimes used to describe these issues like immigration or abortion rights, but it's a cultural kind of issue rather than an economic one. And that's what she's been focusing her message increasingly on, and that's done well with female voters. She's had the Obamas out campaigning for her. She had Michelle Obama campaigning with her on Saturday night, and Michelle Obama doesn't really like getting into the details of everyday politics these days. She likes to stay out of it, but she's gone into the fray to bat for Kamala Harris, which I think just shows how tight things are.
Yeah, certainly. And then you pick up on a good point there. We have seen a revolving door of celebrity endorsements for Kamala Harris in the past few weeks. Dare I ask, do you think, in your opinion, do these endorsements actually work?
Not necessarily. We saw Hillary Clinton had a similar strategy at the end of her 2016 campaign, and she had held a big rally and concert, I think, with the likes of Bruce Springsteen and Jay-Z and a whole lot of musicians. I don't think this necessarily is as effective as you might think. I don't think it hurts. I mean, they're trying everything at the moment. Kamala Harris is pulling out all the stops. She's openly agreed with the idea that Donald Trump is a fascist, and she's painting a very bleak picture of Donald Trump. And I think if you look at the Harris campaign, and look, we'll see where things wash up next week. I might have to eat my words, but if Harris does lose the election, I think we might look back and say she campaigned far too much against Donald Trump than for herself and for what she represents and who she is. One question that Kamala Harris has really struggled to answer throughout the campaign when she's been asked in interviews is how she would differ from Joe Biden. And this, of course, is the president she replaced, the candidate she replaced back in July. You think by now that you would have an answer to that question. But she's just had no answer, and she's given what her opponents call a word salad, where she says a whole lot of things but doesn't really say anything particularly meaningful. She says, she's a different person, brings a different worldview. But when the interviewers press her, but how? How are you actually different to Joe Biden? She doesn't want to say why. Either she can't or she doesn't want to. And the suspicion is, of course, she's been one half of the Biden-Harris administration. So the moment that she says, well, we should have done more of X, they're going to be asking, well, why didn't you do that? You've just been in the White House for 4 years with Joe Biden. Why didn't you do whatever it is that you're saying? So she hasn't wanted to give it an opening for an attack, but at the same time, I think that has made her look very, very weak. And I think she should have had an answer to that question. And when it comes to issues like Gaza, for example, the war in the Middle East, which is a big issue, particularly with younger voters and particularly some of these swing states like Michigan, I think she could have resonated with those voters by taking a slightly different stance more publicly to Joe Biden. I mean, I think there are issues where she could have positioned herself differently, and I think voters would probably give her more credit for that than she might expect. And I don't think she would necessarily be skewered for dropping the ball, if you like, on the Biden-Harris campaign. I don't think that opening to attack would actually be as powerful as some might assume.
Yeah, just very quickly, I just want to just a quick assessment from yourself. Perhaps this is just me being facetious, or it's a cynical view. Are you are Americans just not as progressive as, say, New Zealand? As I initially thought this would be an Ardern moment for Kamala, it's not quite that from my opinion looking in. So yeah, I mean, how progressive are people in the United States?
Look, I think again it comes back to the Electoral College. This is not a simple popular vote. If you look at a lot of the liberal left in the United States, the left is concentrated heavily in states like California, New York, these big states. In the end, they're not really in play in an election, a presidential election campaign, because they are safe. It's very similar to the old first past the post system in New Zealand politics, where you had safe seats and marginal seats, and political parties campaign just in the marginal seats. Essentially, that's what the US system is like. So, in the end, the presidential candidates, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, they're campaigning in these swing states where voters are somewhere in the middle, and that means you're going to provide a more cautious message overall. And so the idea of giving big progressive messages doesn't really resonate with people in those swing states. Remember, you're trying to convince voters, if you're Kamala Harris, who would otherwise vote for Donald Trump. So giving them a left-wing, a truly left-wing message that would resonate on the streets of California just isn't going to work in say Pennsylvania. You've got to have a more calibrated message than that. So I think a lot of these things do come back to the voting system, and it's just a very polarized environment in the United States right now. There are very few truly undecided voters. So a lot of the campaign will probably come down, the final stages of the campaign will come down to turnout and getting out the vote.
Of course. And just before we wrap it up, I just want to get your reaction to this. So at Trump's Madison Square Garden rally, obviously, well, there were a myriad of statements that were made, but basically one that stuck out to me, ex-Fox News host Tucker Carlson called Kamala Harris a low IQ Samoan Malaysian. What do you make of that statement?
Yeah, it's pretty distasteful, and there are a number of distasteful remarks made at that rally. In fact, the Trump campaign even walked back one of them, or stepped away and said they didn't agree with it. One comment about Puerto Rico being, like garbage is what the person said. It wasn't Trump himself, but one of his supporters, a comedian, said, there's a sea of garbage floating out there, and called Puerto Rico, paraphrasing there. And the Trump campaign said, "Oh, we don't support that." And J.D. Vance, the vice presidential candidate, said, "Oh, I haven't seen that. It's not my words, etc." So I thought that was quite remarkable that even it was too radical even for the Trump campaign, and they're trying to convince Latino voters, black voters in this final stage of the campaign. Doesn't seem too smart to me. And the Trump campaign overall has done much better with minorities this time around than they have in the past, according to the polls. And he's doing much better with minorities than especially back in 2016. So it doesn't seem too smart. And yes, some distasteful remarks. Nevertheless, this is Donald Trump's brand as being distasteful and saying things that other people criticize. So I don't know whether it will hurt him. Again, you go back to that September 11th debate when he talked about immigrants eating dogs and cats. To be honest, I don't think that line actually hurt him in the long run. Maybe it even helped him, the fact that that was the only line that people really remember from that TV debate. So Donald Trump is fascinating. He breaks all the rules and seems to do well because of that.
Certainly. Hey, thank you so much for your time. That is international relations expert Jeffrey Miller. You have a good rest of your day, and thanks for your expertise.
Thanks.